I'm not saying that I condone um, the Freddie Gray riots or that I support um, burning down businesses and cutting fire hoses
And
and throwing
also,
rocks through windows.
not to cut you short, but another thing about the Freddie Gray riots that was pretty much misunderstood was that the riot itself was pretty much hijacked by a bunch of people that just wanted to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even really classify that as revenge.
Mhm.
It's just, people taking advantage of other people's pain.
Yeah.
But continue.
Yeah, but what I was gonna say, and I mean, even from yeah, but when you drive through inner city Baltimore, and you can travel from north to south or east to west, whichever direction you want to travel through, you gotta understand that there is no like sense of a community.
Yeah.
You're talking about a city that has between 40,000 to almost some statistics have shown 100,000 vacant homes. And then you're talking about, in addition to those vacant homes, you got boarded up old businesses. You got all these vacant parking lots, these vacant lots that became just green areas with overgrown grass. So when people are going about destroying things, it's not even like, I mean, there were instances where they destroyed actual businesses, they burnt down a Rite Aid, right? But some of the infrastructure that they destroyed wasn't even infrastructure in itself. Like, it was just abandoned, desolate brick buildings, abandoned, desolate wood buildings. And then even if you want to talk about something when we talk about like drugs, right? Alcohol is still a drug.
Yeah.
And when you talk about them raiding a liquor store, that's still a drug. And I'm not trying to justify, you attacking someone's business, someone's livelihood, but liquor can have the same impacts on someone's judgment, just as cocaine, just as heroin, just as weed. So you have that aspect, but the sort of what I'm trying to get at is like the helplessness and the hopelessness that the people in Baltimore felt following that situation sort of drives you to have those type of outbursts. Just like you said, conservation of energy. You got all this helplessness, all this hopelessness coming into you. It got to go somewhere. It got to come out. And rioting isn't always the best way to have it come out. That's why you have music. That's why you have paintings. That's why you have speeches and things like this. What we doing right now, because we are all from Baltimore, live in Baltimore, know people from Baltimore, grew up in the area, grew up in the community. So we've experienced some of those shared stories, and this is our way of sort of getting things off our chest, our way of sort of passing out some of that energy that we receive.
And I know you had some things about gentrification to talk about since you were talking about vacant homes and things like that.
Yeah, so in the city of Baltimore, we have a couple different issues going on when you want to talk about gentrification. And just a generic definition of what gentrification means, or the context that I'm going to use it about in this with this topic, is it's the arrival of wealthier people into an urban area, causing an increase in the cost of living. And with that increase in the cost of living, you're thus pushing lower income families and lower income members of society out of the community that they once inhabited. So you're literally taking away the homes and the buildings that these people, occupied and that these people used for years, and it's being given to another group in society, and then that original group is just left, out the stray. So just some statistics about that. 1/3 of the homes in Greenmount East, Old Town Middle East, Sandtown, and Upton Druid Heights are vacant. So between Governor Larry Hogan and then Mayor Stephanie Rollins Blake, they sort of started this campaign where they want to destroy 40,000 properties in the next 4 years and create these green spaces, and then possibly use them to rebuild homes, rebuild community centers and things like that. And two of the main areas that they're focusing on is Park Heights and then the Johns Hopkins area. So the Johns Hopkins area is to help, or the idea behind it is they destroy all the vacant homes that are, buy out the people that still live in the neighborhood, buy their homes from them. I think they said the average cost is around $92,000. Buy out those homes from those individuals, tear down those homes, the vacant homes, and then redevelop it into condominiums, science buildings for Hopkins, in terms of the medical campus, as well as the school in itself, and then have Johns Hopkins sort of foot the bill. And then with that, you want to sort of create new jobs. That's the idea behind it. But the problem that a lot of citizens are having with that is that when you destroy these housing projects, you're displacing these people, and they never actually do come back.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can't come back. Financially, they can't afford to live in those areas. So there was actually an article that was released by the Sun, and they were talking about Perkins Homes, the housing projects that sit in between Hopkins and the Harbor, and how that's sort of like prime real estate for Hopkins and prime real estate for developers, and how they're gonna come in and sort of take those homes and destroy them and dispel those people. But you have to understand that some of those residents have already been dispelled from other areas in the city. So one of the residents that they interviewed for the article was actually from Hollander Ridge, that housing development that was destroyed, and then she came to Perkins home as her new home, and then now she's getting displaced once again. Remember, what they want to argue when it comes to this gentrification topic is that we're gonna destroy your house, but you can come back. Her home, Hollander Ridge, was destroyed. She got put into Perkins homes, and now that's getting destroyed. So in her eyes, it's just despair. Where is she gonna go next? Who can she turn to? And I know me personally, with West Baltimore being the area of Baltimore that I'm familiar with and that I sort of occupy, I've spoken to tons of residents when it comes to like Park Heights, and they've said on numerous occasions that they've had, white developers, white families even come up to their door and offer them money right then and there on the spot to buy that house. And it's not that these houses are up for sale. It's not that the homeowners had talked to a real estate investor about putting these homes up for sale. It's just literally the fact that black people are being bought out of the areas that they occupy, and they don't have any backup plan. And I mean, if you want to talk, when you travel down Northern Parkway, right, and you're going towards Towson, if you look on your right-hand side, right there by Pimlico, there's one house left, and it's barricaded in, right? And that's because he was that family, that gentleman that owns the house, he's the only person that actually owned his house and the land that his house was on. So when they were talking about buying up all those properties that used to be there and then demolishing all of that to turn it into a casino, they're unable to do that because of his house, because he refused to give in and turn over what he views as his property, what is his property. So that gentrification process is something that's spread out across the city, because you got it going on, like I said, right there by Pimlico. They also just bought out, I think it was 260 homes they just bought out in Park Heights that they want to demolish, and then have Sinai Hospital sort of take part and foot in the bill for that, to create housing for their employees and everything like that. And it's all that's going to end up happening, or the overarching idea, is that the people in the community gets kicked out, and then they have nowhere to go. And you can sort of see that already being done if you want to talk about the closing of like Pimlico High School, because the kids that went to those high school, that went to Pimlico High School, now either have to go to another high school in Baltimore City, which means they're now impeding on somebody else's education, or impeding on somebody else's environment, or those families were relocated to Randallstown and Ricestown, and now they occupy like Randallstown High School, Milford Mill, Newtown, Owens Mills, where they're doing the exact same thing, impeding on that other person's education or whatever the case may be. And it's not from what they want to do, it's just literally the circumstances that they are dealt, and just the cause that they have to, they have to deal with. So
that's very true, and you can also see it by where they put certain modes of transportation,
Mm-hmm.
like bus routes and
Yeah,
metros and
exactly.
things like that. And you can also tell by the certain types of stores that they put in certain areas too. And also, there's another interesting thing is I think it's Bethlehem Steel,
Mm-hmm.
and
That was downtown, yeah.
yeah, that at a time had a huge level of production, and it was pretty much like a staple of the community. And same thing, like the jobs pretty much got run out and things like that, and people didn't have that reliable mode of income, and they pretty much the whole community pretty much had to find like lesser things to do because they weren't like qualified for other jobs and things like that. Because years ago you could take a manufacturing job and be able to support your family and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
and earn a reasonably decent income. And another thing that I would like to mention is that there's a lot of literature and history behind Baltimore and people in general of color, like Frederick Douglass in Maryland, Benjamin Banneker, Baltimore County, Dr. Vivian Thomas worked at Hopkins. And literature history, if you'd like to read more, Black Saga by Charles Christian, familiar with it. The autobiography of Frederick Douglass. There's March, volumes 1, 2, and 3 by John Lewis. The book Invisible Men by Ralph Ellison. And a particularly interesting book is The Other Westmore, which is by a politician named Wes Moore. And do you know the story? Or basically, Wes Moore grew up in Baltimore, and he was given a certain amount of circumstances to do reasonably well, become a politician, author, things like that. And a man with the same name grew up maybe a few miles away, named Wes Moore, basically was involved with, I think, a robbery and a shooting or something, and is currently incarcerated. And it's an interesting study about how two men with the same name in the same neighborhood could have such different outcomes given slightly different conditions. And that's definitely an interesting one to check out.
Hold up. Yo, Vic. Yo, we met Wes Moore.
Oh, you guys did? That's pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
we met Wes Moore at a BPM breakfast in 2012 or 2013. He came by and he shook all our hands.
Word!
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I forgot we met Wes Moore.
Wow.
You guys should read the book then.
Oh, dang.
True, I totally blanked on that. Wow, that is true.
I forgot that we met Wes Moore. Oh, dang.
I think he won an award that year, something like that, right?
Yeah.
That's why he might have been there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wow, that is true.
And Martin Luther King says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so you should check out the Nauru Island child prison stories, the Chibok, Nigeria kidnappings, the Mbuti Pygmies in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Talibés in Senegal, the UN peacekeeper abuse in actually the Democratic Republic of the Congo also. And is there anything else you guys like to contribute or say that's been on your chest?
Yeah, so I'm big on watching sort of like online interviews, right? And I was watching a Minister Farrakhan interview, and might not agree with everything he does, might not agree with everything he says, but he definitely did say something in this interview that I'm going to reference that I think would be a good idea in terms of helping Baltimore sort of rebuild and bounce back from some of these things. He was saying that when you talk about your inner city environments, right, and you have all these vacant lots, like where you used to have old buildings or just open patches of grass and that kind of thing, that you could turn them into gardens to help out with the whole idea of a food desert, right? And a food desert, for those who don't know, is an area where you don't have a local grocery store to provide fresh food and food to sustain the community. You have to venture out of the community to get those necessities and then come back in. So he was saying that you can sort of create farms, right? Farm for your respective goods and then sell them or distribute them back out to the community. And in that case, you're getting fresh food, so you're not worrying about any GMOs, any type of chemicals like that. In that regard, it's pretty pretty organic. You eliminate the whole idea of a food desert because you have like a farmer's market right there that you can buy things from. But why I say I don't know if this could be used in the Baltimore area is because of the huge homeless population that we have. So what I was actually thinking about was taking that idea, but taking it a step further. And with the homeless population and with the vacant home situation, is that you remodel and renovate the vacant homes, right? And you provide them to the homeless population, but you provide it to them on a conditional basis in the sense that they have to work for their home. So let's say they said the vacant homes were like $92,000, right? They said that was the average price that they bought a vacant home for. For the typical salary for some of these people in some areas in Baltimore, like Little Italy, I think is like 35 grand. So if you can have an individual work at one of these farms over a 3-year span, then they get paid with the house. And then that sort of takes that helps to take and lower your homeless population, take these people off the streets. You give them their own property, something that they have in themselves right now. So then they're the ones that have to serve when it comes to the uptake and the keep of their property. And then you don't even necessarily have to have them just work in the farm environment, because I do know that Baltimore is also Maryland is we're one of those states that we get all 4 seasons, right? So winter time and those type of things you can't farm. So you could maybe have at that time they could work sort of as like contractors or something. I know this idea isn't really perfect, but they can work for or work off and get something of their own in that regard, and then they can help. At the same time, they can help rebuild community centers and that kind of thing. Because I mean, as I travel through West Baltimore, East Baltimore, South Baltimore, I see all these vacant community centers, and I see all these kids running around on the sidewalk, blowing bubbles and trying to hula hoop and jump rope and hopscotch and stuff like that. And if you remodel one of these community centers, they have a safe place indoor to do that type of thing. They don't have to be on the side of the road where anything could happen, where a ball rolls down the street and now they got to run out and get the ball. In a community center, they just bounce off the wall and come right back to you. So that's just my thoughts when it comes to that.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I know like the problem with abandoned homes is getting pretty bad, especially with the large homeless population too. Especially areas like Hopkins and everything, which ironically is the same place they're building they're trying to gentrify to.
Gentrify,
So,
yep.
Victor, was there anything you wanted to say?
Just like we need to stop closing down schools in Baltimore.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Like, cause it's a major problem. Like, schools get closed down in Baltimore all the time. And like, I mean, like all the time. And it's like crazy. Like, you have elementary schools that get closed down, so then all the kids have to be forced into another school. Then you have classroom population. The kids can't learn properly. And then, of course, that discourages kids from even trying to go to school in the first place. Then, all these people, there are a lot of people in Baltimore making too much money for doing nothing, honestly. There's a lot of people in Baltimore's government that's been stealing money for years. Like, honestly, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, she's taking a lot of money. Like, people aren't stupid. Like, we know, like, there's, like, missing money in, like, the budget. It doesn't make sense. The amount of money that Baltimore claims to bring in should be, like, put into other projects. But yet they claim, like, they don't have enough money in the budget. Like, you're lying to me, okay? Like, I know you're lying to me. So it's like, because Stephanie Rawlings Blake, for example, for, like, years has been, like, going to all these, like, mayor's meetings, staying in, like, first-class hotels for, like, these mayor's meetings, yet there's nothing happening in our city. Like, nothing. You have all of these benches in Baltimore that reads, Baltimore, the city that reads.
Oh, the greatest city in America.
The greatest city in America. Like, the ironic part about Baltimore, the city that reads, is that Maryland for the past few years has had, like, the highest test scores in the country out of, like, all the states. But, like, the only, like, literally Maryland has, like, the highest test scores in the country now. Maryland also has, like, the highest, like, median house income in the country now. But the only reason why those averages aren't higher is because of Baltimore City. You know? If you remove Baltimore City from like some of like those statistics, Maryland would look like a safe haven, would look like a utopia. Well, because there are like certain issues in Baltimore City, like that kind of brings some of those statistics down. But I feel like for the better interest of like everyone in the state, since Baltimore's the biggest city, you help uplift Baltimore, that helps uplift everybody. You know what I mean? Like
The rising tide lifts all ships.
exactly, rising tide lifts all ships. Like it doesn't make any type of sense to me, like how we can like how people can continually justify like all the crap that's happening in Baltimore. It's like like these schools should not be closing down. Like there's no reason for these. I don't care like what it takes. Like these schools should not be closing down while more prisons are being created. And then people will argue, well, with certain town populations, like you are required to have this certain amount of prisons. That's an issue. It's because it's like, like let's stop putting money into the prison industrial complex. Because that's really what it is. Prison industrial complex, that's a business in itself. It's basically free labor. You have all these prisoners that are doing all this work for like free, and then like, the local government can like use these resources that these prisoners make and then sell them off and make a profit. That's literally what the prison industrial complex is, man. And Baltimore feeds into that like heavily. So like, like I know, like of course the powers that be may not want that to happen, but you have to think about it. Like, if we like get rid of like some of that stuff, instead of building prisons, you guys focus on building more community centers. You give kids a place to play instead of them being on the street selling drugs. That changes everything. Like that changes so much. Like you give these kids a place to play. You give these after school programs that also keep the kids off the street. It doesn't have to be just sports. Because I know sports is a big thing in Baltimore. It doesn't have to be just sports. It can just be like instruments. It can be like acting. It can be like even history clubs and all these other things. Like you give kids like these interests and they follow these interests, they will stay off the streets, and Baltimore is a better city. Because in Baltimore, it's not like Baltimore like has bad schools either. It's ironic because Baltimore has some of the best schools in the country. Like for public schools, Poly and Baltimore City College are like two of the best.
And Western is one of the best all-girls schools.
Yeah, and Western School for the Girls.
Mm-hmm.
The three best public schools in Baltimore: Western School for the Girls, Poly, and Baltimore City College. Those three schools are three of the best schools in the entire state. You could argue some of the best schools in the country. And not the country, like at least the East Coast. And you have those three great schools, and then you have other schools where like your graduation rates are like extremely low. It shouldn't be. You shouldn't have like this
Huge difference.
yeah, huge difference, like this shift in power. Like to me it's crazy that like you have people, because there are people who go to Baltimore City College or go to Poly, they're so proud of their high school that they have their high school license plate. Not even college license plate, they have their high school license plate. I feel like a lot of the resources that or like attention that are given to like those schools should be given to like some of these other schools as well. You know what I mean? And also not even just that, like Baltimore has some of the best private schools in the country. Like with Friends, Loyola, like Baltimore is notorious for like its like private schools as well. So it's not like Baltimore doesn't have this ability. It's like it's very possible to transform the public school system. It's very possible. I just feel like people honestly haven't worked hard enough. That's what I really feel. I feel like people haven't worked hard enough, they haven't cared enough, and there's just been a lot of people that have been stuffing their pockets for years. I just want to just stop.
And with what he's talking about with opening, not closing down schools and that kind of thing, you're also helping the economy because you have this influx of money in terms of consumers. You have this influx of people who now have money to buy things and attain things and sort of work towards financial independence or work towards these financial goals. And when you talk about creating community centers and after school programs and things like that, not only are you keeping the younger generation off the streets, but the older generation, you're giving them a job as well. So you're allowing them to work towards their their financial freedom, or work towards their financial abilities and that kind of thing, because it's not just about the lack of education in Baltimore, it's also the lack of jobs. in Baltimore as well, because um, when people get for the individuals who do graduate high school who don't want to venture off and go to college, they don't have anything to do in the city. They don't. There's no place for them to turn to work and have a stable job that they can use to support themselves. They're not given those same opportunities. So by like you were talking about Bethlehem Steel earlier, right? And those individuals, not all of them were college educated. They would graduate from high school, go to Bethlehem Steel and work at Bethlehem Steel, and they could provide for their families. You no longer have that ability in Baltimore. You no longer have that ability in tons of cities across the country. So there has to be something you can do to replace those jobs. There has to be something you can do to replace that income. There has to be something you can do to give these people a fighting chance still. Because it's not from a lack of ambition. And I know this is horrible to sort of to term it in this way, but like when you were talking about gangs and how they could channel their energy or channel their talents into other things, right? Drug dealers are actually extremely smart.
Yeah,
Like a lot of people don't realize that, but for you to deal drugs, you have to be extremely smart. You have to be cognizant of your environment. So you got to know exactly who's who, what they doing, where they are at all times. You got to be extremely good with math, because you got to be able to break down things and divide things. You got to be able to multiply. You definitely got to be a people person, because you're not just going to be interacting with any and everybody. You gotta talk to your customers or whatever the case may be, and those are real life skills that those individuals can use and put towards something else. That's why a lot of those people that end up in jail and come back out on that second chance or on that third chance, that's why they go to community outreach, because they spent all these years in all these positions where they gathered all of these more manual labor-based skills that they can then apply through community service and public outreach. They can talk to these younger generations and communicate with them in a way that people who are removed from those environments can't. And if you give a drug dealer a legitimate job, they're not going to deal drugs anymore. And that goes right back to what we were talking about earlier when it comes to hip hop music and sort of the negative image that's portrayed. A lot of these rappers, they rap about dealing drugs, and they rap about shooting people, and they rap about all these different things, but they're no longer in those situations. They're removed from those situations. Exactly. So if you remove drug dealers from these situations, you give them another out, they're no longer going to deal drugs. Nobody wants to deal drugs. Yeah. Nobody wants to have to sleep with one eye open and be worried about who's going to kick in the front door, whether the police or a rival. Nobody wants to deal with that. They'd much rather be able to earn a living and take care of their family in a better way, and in a way that's not gonna get them hurt. Like there's the podcast The Tax Stone, right? And he said this numerous times in numerous interviews. His podcast is his first legal check that he's ever gotten in his life. And he is proud of that, because he is no longer being a negative member of his society, of his community. He's now legally making money and no longer harming those around him to make a living. Yes, he might talk about the things that he did before podcasting, but he always reverts back to saying, hey, that's all negative, and this is the positive that I'm doing now. These podcasts have allowed me to remove myself from that situation. They've allowed me to move myself forward. And people in Baltimore need something to help them move themselves forward. We in this room, we have found that in education. But like I said, education isn't for everybody. There's definitely tons of manual labor jobs and manual labor skills that people possess in this city that go unused and untapped into and unrealized because of the environmental constraints that they're placed into. If you place a kid in Sandtown, right, and they dropped out of school in the 11th grade, because they gotta figure out some way to help their mother, their parents, take care of bills at home because one parent might not work, right? That kid reverts to drug dealing. That kid doesn't want a drug deal. That kid's only drug dealing to help take care of the situation that's going on at home. All they want is that at-home situation to be better, and the at-home situation is the way it is based upon a financial constraint. So if you have jobs that both parents can work, the child never has to drop out of school. The child never has to start their drug dealing. The child never gets a criminal record, and now you have a family of upstanding members in society. You don't have these parents who are trying to figure out where they went wrong and why that kid is gone down this path. And in the kid's mind, they only went down that path because they wanna help out and help their parents, come from or uplift themselves from the situation that they're in. So it's very intricate in terms of the way in which communities interact in Baltimore, the politics behind Baltimore, the education system in Baltimore. Because like you said, there's no reason for you to have some of the best schools and some of the worst schools within city blocks of one another. We're not even talking about you got some of these cities, some of these schools in West Baltimore and then some of these schools in East Baltimore. Some of these schools are literally 4 or 5 blocks down the street from one another. Like the kids take the same bus to get to school with one another. And this guy's gonna go to this school and this guy's gonna go to this school. And they get in 2 totally different educations, and it makes no sense. It makes no sense. And it's heartbreaking. It's like really heartbreaking to see what's going on in the city.
Yeah, and we do want the best for everyone, and like you said, it is heartbreaking. I can legitimately say I've lost sleep over the past few weeks thinking about all of this. All of us pretty much have either at some point lived in Baltimore, worked in Baltimore, gone to school in Baltimore, and sometimes like all 3. Well, actually, yeah, all 3 of us. So, yeah, we do care about how much investment is being put into the city, and we hope that you look more into these things if you're watching this, because ignorance is deadly. That's a fact. The more you learn about history, the more you learn about economics, the more you learn about pretty much each other, the more improvements we can start making. And with that being said, I'd like to end with a quote in light of the recent events. You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea, which was from Edgar Avers. Thanks for watching.
In our darkest hour, in my deepest despair, will you still care?
Will you be there?
In my trials and my tribulations, through our doubts and frustrations.
In my violence, in my turbulence, through my fear and my confessions.
In my anguish and my pain, through my joy and my sorrow.
In the promise of another tomorrow.